Hello and welcome to the Sandip Roy Show on Express Audio.
The Sandip Roy Show.
In a country where Durga Puja is the biggest festival in Bengal and Ganpati is the biggest in Maharashtra and Pongal in Tamil Nadu, the one festival that unites a culturally diverse country like India might well be Amazon's Great India Festival. The last few years have seen an explosion in the world of online retail where we expect everything to be delivered to our doorstep, from books and clothes to meals to electricians and plumbers and of course taxis. To Uber it or Swiggy it have become verbs in today's modern world. The great convenience of it all is undeniable. But the facelessness of this world is also uncharted territory when it comes to our sense of work, where we are now suddenly ruled by an algorithm. Sometimes it feels we all live under the thrall of a mysterious OTP. That's the magic ring that rules us all, without which our lives will come to a crashing halt. But how does this gig economy affect the people involved, from those who work it, to those who consume it, to those who create it? OTP Please, online buyers, sellers and gig workers in South Asia, examines how the gig economy is reshaping our lives. And we are joined today by its author, Vandana Vasudevan. Vandana Vasudevan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sandip, for having me here. I'm absolutely delighted.
The word gig, which we hear so much about these days, you write is an American term. It was coined in the 1920s by jazz musicians who were carrying their instruments with them and performing at bars and cafes, wherever they could find a gig, basically. But in India, do we have any sense of how many of the people working in the gig economy are actually working gigs versus working full-time or sometimes even more than full-time?
Okay, so there's one Niti Aayog report which everyone quotes, which put the number of people who are working in what is called location-based gig workers, which is the people who move from place to place, right? There are two kinds of gig workers. I think at this point I should explain. There's one which are working online. So they're at home, they're working for Upwork and Fiverr and they're freelancing, making designs or, doing translation work or something. These are the online gig workers. Then there are location-based gig workers who are the most visible on the road, who are carrying things here and there, who are delivery workers or Uber cab drivers, etc. So the Niti Aayog report of 2021 pegs that number at 77 lakh, but the word on the street by union leaders and all is that it's about 3-4 crore people are engaged in this kind of work in India. So nobody has any real numbers because the government is not able to track them, because not everyone has an ID and somebody works for 6 months and somebody, goes to the village after that. So the nature of the work is such that they are not enlisted in a permanent way. And the tech platforms are the only people who have this data about who is working for how long. But they are not ready to share that data. And therefore, at present, the government is making some efforts on a portal where they're asking people to enlist themselves, etc. But we need to see how that works. So basically, we don't know how many people exactly are engaged in gig work.
No, when it started, and I remember the early days when Uber had shown up in San Francisco, and friends of mine who were engineers between jobs, they basically used their cars, few hours a day, they would do Uber, taking people to the airport and this and that. And they kind of loved it because they felt like they could do it for a few hours and then put it aside and go back to it as needed. But from your research, did you find that the gig economy here operated very differently in South Asia compared to the West? Basically, is Uber in India very different from Uber in San Francisco?
Yes, in fact, I was engaged in a research with Worker Rights NGO where we polled 5,500 gig workers, and till date it's the largest survey of its kind. And this also adds to your previous question. In that survey, we found that the people who are doing this work, contrary to what had happened in America when Uber was introduced, are really main earners of their family. So after COVID, a lot of people lost their jobs, as you know. So, somebody was a school bus driver, but then schools shut down and he had nothing to do. And a lot of small businesses wrapped up. And there was a lot of financial distress. So all of those people in hordes joined the gig economy and became delivery agents and cab drivers, etc. So those people are main earners of their family. Their entire livelihood of the household depends on this one main earner. And we also found that they are there for a long time. So it's like having a permanent gig, which is really an oxymoron, and it's a contradiction in terms. Because a gig by definition is a side hustle. You just do it, you earn some money and you move on. But that's not how it is here. For a large part, there are people who work for 10 to 14 hours a day and they are earning for, to feed a family of 4 or 5 people. And they're hustling, but they are hustling in the, for like 14, 16 hours sometimes. And we have a peculiar situation, therefore, where it is an informal sort of employment, but it also has elements of formal employment because there's control through the algorithm by the tech platform, and there's very little say that the gig worker has in who he's going to meet or how much he's going to charge. Everything is pre-decided like in a formal employment, but it is in fact informal. So it is a strange situation in the world of work, where the gig economy has thrown up a completely new entity.
You said many of the people who lost their jobs in COVID sort of flooded into this economy, and one can understand because, this is one way you can making some money. But did you find from your surveys that most of them or even all of them thought of it as something temporary, or were they actually looking at it as a permanent job that they wanted to continue for years to come? That way we look at jobs and careers.
I found that there were a lot of people who were waiting for their visa or they wanted to go abroad. They were waiting for that right break to happen. There were students who were going to study abroad, but they wanted to do it in between. That category does exist, but they also find themselves lingering on because of external factors like a war breaks out, there's recession, the visa doesn't come. And they find themselves lingering on. And then there are the other people who really don't have an option, who are some 35, 40 years old, who don't aspire to be gig workers. It's not a job that, anyone aspires to be. But they find that they started it as some sort of stopgap arrangement, but they are forced to continue because they're not able to find an alternative which can pay as much. And, the sad thing is that a lot of them are reasonably qualified. They've finished their high school. Some of them are even graduates. And this is a low skill job at the end of the day because you don't have what you really need. You need to drive a two-wheeler and you need to drop a packet. And it's a fairly physically strenuous job because you're fighting traffic and dust, and you know how it is with now in urban India, gated communities are the norm. And for a gig worker to enter a gated community, get an approval, go through that whole process, then go in the separate lift up to deliver a packet. And we've had cases where the customer has opened the door and dogs have rushed out at the gig worker, the pet dog. In one case in Hyderabad, the worker lost his life, and in another case, he was severely injured. So these are risks that are inherent with the job. So it's not an easy job. And nobody wants to do it also because there isn't really respect, right? So I've heard gig workers tell me that, on the road, people say, hey, hat jao, Amazon, like you're blocking the way with your two-wheeler. So, hat jao, Swiggy kind of thing. So some of them don't even wear their uniform because they don't want to be identified as a gig worker. So there's no respect. And it's really, I think, a sad way to use the talent of India, the youthful talent of India, on whom we are depending so much for as our demographic dividend. And we are saying that, these are the people who are going to catapult the country into 2050 and Viksit Bharat and everything. But these guys can really do better jobs, and we have to think of what those better jobs are, and how we can create good, decent opportunities where people's skills can be used in a better way. There's no easy answer, but it's really worth thinking about.
Compared to the West, has gig work affected women differently in South Asia in ways both good and bad?
So for women, it's extremely interesting. As when you talk about women workers, okay, for sure, this has been a great opportunity for them in various ways. So in previous work, they would get paid in cash, and the income that they earn would be transparent to everyone in the household, and they would have to give that money to, the husband or whoever in the house. For example, there's a case of a beautician from urban company whom I met, who said to me that, the money just comes into my account, and I'm planning to buy a house in my hometown, and I'm saving up for that. And my husband is an Ola driver, and he's doing his own thing. But I don't even have to talk to him about how much money I earned and what I'm going to do with it. It's entirely my decision. So it really empowers them in that sense. And they also have flexibility of time, which enables them to handle their domestic duties and also earn their living. It really empowers them to earn their living as well as they manage their domestic demands at home. So in that sense, it's been very liberating for women, for sure. And also for women customers. So, the gig economy is also not just the worker, it's also the customer. So ride hailing, for example, has been quite transformational in the mobility that women have. So it has increased the ambit of their mobility. They're able to go wherever they want because they know that they have the safety of being tracked, and it's an app. And if anybody wants to monitor them, there are arguments about this that, why should women be monitored, etc. But there is a sense of safety that women definitely feel knowing that they are, using an app, and the cab can be called to their home and they can be left to the doorstep of wherever they want to go. So a lot of women in various parts of the region said that things have been easier. They don't have to depend on their husband or some male person. They don't have to depend on whether there is a personal car at home or will somebody drop me. They can just literally call a cab or an auto. And the inclusion of autos in this has really democratized it and sort of leveled the playing field completely, because cabs used to be expensive, but auto is just the same thing. It is what they were using anyway, but just more, structured and easier to handle.
In fact, I think you mentioned two really interesting cases which I hadn't thought about, especially sitting in India. One, I think, is a service that started in Bangladesh, which is empowered women, which trained women to drive two-wheelers, because a lot of women don't necessarily want to get onto a two-wheeler driven by a man. And the other was a similar point, I think, from Pakistan, where you said, like, as a customer, you suddenly spared the burden of, I don't need to put on my burqa in order to go pick up a carton of milk. Like, that's liberation too, which we don't necessarily think of as happening in San Francisco.
I was really surprised by this anecdote that I heard from this lady in Lahore when she said that I would normally have had to don my burqa and go out every time I want to buy any small thing from the local grocery shop. But ever since I found Panda Mart, I just have to tap a few keys and I can stay at home and the thing gets delivered to me. Who would have thought? Who would have thought quick commerce will have this kind of liberating effect on Muslim women who wear the burqa? So that is definitely a huge sense of freedom and liberation that has happened for women consumers.
Given that, wouldn't one expect that women would be getting into these jobs in droves, far more greater numbers than they are, given the many advantages around flexibility and things that it offers them? What's the holdup?
So I've asked this question also in the book, as in where are the delivery girls? Why is it always a delivery boy who appears at your door? The few delivery girls that are there, and I'm not just saying about delivery people, also, drivers of cabs, etc., have the usual problems that women face in doing jobs which require them to be on the road. So safety and security is one of them. There's always a threat of, sexual harassment. There have been 2 cases of women Uber drivers. The few that are there of them, there were 2 cases in Delhi where there was assault and the girl's windscreen was broken. And there was another one where another girl was attacked. And all this has obviously not created a good precedent, and, it has deterred more women from coming in. There's also the simple fact of mobility of women. Not everyone is able to ride a 2-wheeler, which is why that example of Lily rides in Dhaka is so important, because they identified that this is a problem, and just knowing how to ride a 2-wheeler can help the women do so much more. So there's that issue of not being able to ride a 2-wheeler. There is physical security. And then there's this point, which is my favorite in the sphere of urban development, women's toilets. You're on the road driving for ages. So where do you go to take a break? There aren't so many, Delhi is trying, there are some pink toilets, etc. But if you see across the nation, there's a huge problem. So all these are deterrents from, for women to join the gig economy. And that's why we don't see as many women delivery agents, or you sit in a cab, you don't ever meet a female Uber driver unless you choose a pink taxi or something like that at the airport.
Isn't this something, though, that you would think the tech companies would be interested in creating things like facilities, toilets for women? Because in the end, it's brownie points for them. They can pat themselves on the back and they get more riders and delivery people.
Absolutely. This is what I had written even in the survey report that I authored and in the book. This is a huge opportunity. Diversity is profitable. Diversity is not just for doing something good. And this is a big opportunity for Uber, Ola, Rapido to team up with civic authorities and set up more restrooms or resting areas for women. In fact, even tie up with NGOs who teach driving to women and sort of sponsor them, maybe sponsor a 2-wheeler, sponsor their driving class. And it's really a question of setting an example, as more girls come in and they start becoming delivery workers or cab drivers, and more will follow. So somebody's got to take the lead. The tech platforms are in a great position to do so. And this is an area that is waiting to be tapped through a 3-way link between the girls, the NGOs, and the tech platforms.
Vandana, you got into this research, as you say in the beginning, because when the pandemic happened, you noticed that at your apartment complex, these delivery people were kept coming, and you got curious about what was going on, what was their lives and stuff. So what do you think actually caused the gig economy to explode the way it did? I mean, the pandemic didn't create it, but did the pandemic lockdown, was it the pandemic lockdown, or was it cheap data and, geo, smartphone and all of that becoming so hugely available that has caused this explosion that we are seeing around us?
So a couple of developments have enabled this explosion to happen. So one is that smartphones have become a need rather than a want. So in India, 1 billion people are expected to possess a smartphone by the time we enter the next decade. In 2014, 30% of the population of South Asia was out of reach of a mobile network, and 10 years later, only 8% are out of a mobile network. The second thing that has happened is that paying for anything has become effortless. Even people on the pavement who sell fruits have a QR code with them. So in contemporary urban India, everyone flashes a QR code, and it's so easy to even buy something for like 20 rupees. So such payments apparently happen more than 400 million times a day across the country. So all of this has made it really easy. the possession of smartphones, the ability to pay digitally. And of course, in terms of consumer behavior, once consumers are used to a certain level of convenience, then the bar is anyway raised about what they expect, right? It's a bit like daylight saving time, the example that I've quoted in the book. Daylight saving started after World War II as a sort of to save energy. But after that, people got so used to it that it became a norm and it actually isn't really required anymore. So it just set the bar for convenience and, what you can do just sitting at home so high that nobody wants to change that anymore.
You say it made everything very easy because even everybody has a UPI code, and that is absolutely true. But I'm curious, have studies also been done on what that has done to our budgets? Because when I do the UPI scan as opposed to the cash in my wallet, the cash in my wallet was always limited. The UPI seems to come from the Reserve Bank of India or something, right? I think I have endless money. And then suddenly at the end of the month, I'm like, oh shit, where did my money go? And I'm like, I've Swiggied it away.
So this is what I have dealt with in the chapter called Guilt, where a lot of young people say that, there is this latte factor. So you keep buying more and more lattes and you suddenly realize that you've spent all your money on coffee. And there's a book by the name, which is a bestseller in America. It's an entire phenomenon that the young experience where they keep buying things online and find that they've blown their budget. So several young people in that chapter are talking about two kinds of guilt. One is, of course, the financial aspect of living beyond their means and going on buying food. And the other is about eating too much. So there is an obesity epidemic. According to the World Obesity Report, India is placed in a precarious position in that. And when people keep eating and things are available on tap, and any food from any corner of the restaurant can come to you at any time, a lot of things happen. Your circadian rhythm goes for a toss and you end up slowly adding the calories. And there's this great example, not of food, but of cigarettes. So I met this young Supreme Court lawyer, said that when he used to buy cigarettes physically, like you go to the shop and buy, he used to buy, maybe a couple of sticks. But when he orders online, you don't get a couple of sticks, you get a whole packet. So actually, he has started smoking way more than he used to. So there's a lot of guilt induced because people realize this, but then they don't want to step back because it's so addictive, it's so easy, there's so many notifications, there's nudge marketing telling you, hey, do you want to have an ice cream? Because you ordered one last Sunday at the same time. How about a biryani? How about pakoras? It's raining outside. So things keep happening and there's a lot of willpower required to resist what's on offer.
And I was amazed at the number of people you talk to who are, well-to-do and stuff. So money is not necessarily a huge issue for them, but they will have a full dinner at home, but then their sort of little ritual or treat to themselves is at later after dinner, I'll sit and watch Netflix and order something more from Swiggy. I mean, this is not something my mother would have clobbered us on the head if we tried to do that.
Nobody has done this before. It's unprecedented. In fact, there's a professor in the University of Virginia who has written a lot about food. And he mentions that in our cultures, there's this idea of niyamit ahar. So niyam se khana kind of thing. And right now, there's no scope for that to get implemented. There's no niyam because you can get absolutely anything, anytime. So, which is why I have strewn the book with examples of people who are midnight eaters. There's this guy in Hyderabad I spoke to. He said 12 to 2 is his time. He orders food, he puts on Netflix, and then he just, relaxes and the family is asleep. And he's up at 7 to drop the children, etc. But at this time, he does what he wants, and it's a combination of so many factors which have led to this, not just the availability of Swiggy, Zomato and other apps, but also increased stress at work, the way our cities have grown and how it's so much harder to go out and eat, which in itself would be a deterrent. So if you have to go If you only had the option to drive and go to a restaurant, you'd say, forget it. Who's going to tackle the traffic, go all the way, etc. But you don't have to do that anymore. So the cities have become so forbidding and stress has increased so much, and all these apps are there for the asking. So a lot of things are coming together.
And it's not even that you don't have to just go. It's taking away the kind of sort of stigma that still remains about eating alone. Right? There are certain restaurants where you feel okay eating alone and certain ones where you don't. And, there's a lot of food or whatever you don't feel like. But with Swiggy, I mean, the whole family can order and everyone can still eat alone.
Yeah, absolutely. The youngsters who say that, because office timings differ and family dinner timings differ, because sometimes people come late beyond like 9 o'clock and the family has already eaten. So it's so much more enabling to just order something, go into your room. And anyway, the phone is always with you. So you can see something on the phone, you can eat. It's just you, your phone, your room. You can cut yourself off pretty much. And there's a girl in Colombo who told me that it's really interesting. She said she treats herself, at various times of the day. So she goes to office. She anyway has lunch with her friends. They all order in. Then she goes back home, and just the sheer act of having finished office and going back home, she feels deserves a little pampering. So she orders a little hazelnut coffee, a little muffin.
That's supposed to be your daily life. Why do you deserve pampering for finishing office?
It's called a little treats culture. Apparently it was a trend in TikTok, little treats. So people used to post their buyings, a little treat for themselves. Sometimes not food, maybe a little lipstick or anything, but just for having gotten through what they consider like a tough part of the day. And so this makes it so much easier. You want to treat yourself, you just tap something on the phone and a muffin will come home, a little coffee, hazelnut flavored will come home. So everything is conducive to you pampering yourself, spending more money, just, enjoying your life as much as possible.
You're a parent. Does this reassure you or freak you out?
So thankfully, my son has only been using Swiggy to order a particular kind of food, Mexican food, burrito and things like that. And that's also largely because he thinks that, he needs the protein or something. But even then, I get nervous when he starts ordering. I say, there's enough protein in the dal that we have made. There's something else. There's also paneer sabzi. Why don't you have that? Do you really need to order? So, of course, I do get nervous. And, it's like there's a section I've written saying what happened to Maa Ka Khana, because Maa Ka Khana has sort of taken a backseat. And with so many offerings in the city, who wants to eat Maa Ka Khana? That, it was a revered thing at one point, romanticized in movies and things like Maa Ke Haath Ka Kheer and Maa Ke Haath Ka Laddu and all that. Everything is available outside, possibly tastier, affordable, easier to access. So Maa Ka Khana itself has taken a backseat.
In fact, and you mentioned this in the book, is sort of the unspoken goal of apps like Swiggy and Zomato, that you won't really need a kitchen in your house of the future. Just as actually when Uber was starting, everybody I remember kept telling me, nobody will need personal cars anymore because there'll always be this Uber available for you whenever you need a car.
So apparently in Singapore, the size of the kitchen has shrunk because it has become a norm for working couples to grab something and, for dinner and come home and eat that. So the need to cook has really shrunk over the years, and therefore that's visible in the size of the kitchen. So there is a cartoon by Hemant Morparia about where there are two buildings, and one is called Swiggy Enclave and one is called Zomato Enclave. And the broker who's showing those flats to the prospective tenants says, look, there are no kitchens in any of these flats. And that's supposed to be like a selling point. So maybe we'll get there someday. It's a very horrifying thought. But Sandip, the interesting thing is that, and I couldn't unravel this as I was writing, the interesting thing is that in parallel, we are also seeing a huge interest in food otherwise. You look at the YouTube channels, there are home chefs, there are celebrity chefs, there are pastry chefs, and they seem to have emerged out of nowhere. There's village cooking, there's rustic cooking, slow cooking, all kinds of things are there. And each of them has millions of views. So I haven't been able to figure it out. Are people just watching and saying, wow, this looks so nice, but then going home and ordering their food in? Or are people watching and people are trying? Or, is it a combination of both of them? I spoke to different people to understand this. I spoke to a cloud kitchen guy. I spoke to a restaurateur to ask whether, traffic has sort of thinned ever since food delivery came in. I spoke to Veer Sangvi, who writes a lot on food and food trends. But we really couldn't find an answer to, this is what is happening. And because restaurants are doing well too. There are enough people in restaurants. YouTube channels have millions of viewers, all these cookery channels that you see. But online ordering is also booming. So what exactly is happening? I think maybe we are in a state of flux and maybe things will pan out and we will know what's happening in the next few years. But as of now...
Or we're just eating a lot more.
Yeah, or are we eating a lot?
At midnight, you're eating ghar ka khana and then you're ordering something on
Possible.
Swiggy.
And,
but there's also, I think, the algorithms keep feeding you. You look at one food thing and, my Instagram reel constantly feeds me more and more recipes, which I keep looking at and saving, but I'm not really going to necessarily make most of
them. Yeah.
But we do that, which sort of leads us to the algorithm, which is the heart of it. But actually, before I go to the algorithm, if I ask you, you've seen this booming world out there, and for all of us looking at our phones and stuff, it does seem booming. But when you talk to all these operators, big and small, in India, Pakistan, Nepal, how many of them are actually truly profitable? Because somebody you talk to says the Indian market is not as big as they make it out to be, though they keep hiring drivers and riders through referral programs.
So you've hit the nail on the head on this one. A lot of the angst that Uber drivers have right now, or even food delivery agents have, is that the market has become fragmented and they are not getting as many orders as they used to. There's an example of a guy I met in Jaipur who said that when I started, I was really minting money and I thought, hey, what is this new thing, that new way of earning that has come about? And I'm going to really work hard at this. I'm going to work 10, 12 hours and I'm going to really rake in the money. And he says after about 6 months, he would sit outside a restaurant and he would find that some other guy is coming from somewhere else and he has the order for that restaurant while he's located right there. The order never came to him. So, there is a sense among workers that as you grow older in the system, you're less valued in the sense that you get fewer orders, and more people, newer and newer people are coming in, and therefore the market is getting fragmented. The number of orders are lesser. So this again is a bit of a mystery. Nobody knows exactly how this is unfolding. Also, in the Blinkit store, there's an example in the book where, a store manager was told that you need to hire 150 delivery boys in your area. And he was like, why do I need to hire 150? I mean, I don't have that much work. But then they said no, because you know how the Blinkit dark store functions. Like as soon as an order comes in, the delivery guy will come right to the store. Meanwhile, the order has also pinged on, the device that the picker has inside the store. So that picker runs and, gets the right variant of whatever brand you have. Suppose it's tea, then he will get that particular tea, bread, milk, whatever it is. And in 2 minutes, in less than 2 minutes, he has to ensure that it is packed and yes, it's kept in a particular, it's like a bit of an assembly line kind of thing. You have to keep it over there so that the delivery guy can come and pick it up, within seconds and run to the customer. That's how we get our order, right? So the company had told the manager that you need to get 150 delivery boys because whatever is the order, suppose it's bread, it can't lie there for more than 2 seconds. It has to be picked up. So we can't have less people. We have to have enough people so that no order is unserved or no order is delivered, more than the time that we promise. So tech platforms are definitely hiring more people, and therefore the market is getting fragmented, and which is the angst among the workers saying, what is happening? I used to never earn so little. And when I started off, it seemed like a great deal, and this is not continuing. And that's why there is so much anger.
But what is the reason for that? Because I thought the whole point that this is driven by an algorithm rather than the whims of a person who will have their own biases and problems, is that the algorithm will very clinically and non-biasedly determine who is best suited for the job. The algorithm is not supposed to have bias. And that person who happens to be outside the restaurant is the person who should be best able to service that request, right? Because they are closest to the restaurant right now. What is the advantage to a Swiggy or whoever to choose someone from further away who's newer rather than this more experienced person sitting right outside the restaurant? I mean, it doesn't make logical sense to me.
Yeah, it didn't either to me. But then I spoke to this guy in Kathmandu who had run an app like this, a ride-hailing app. In fact, he had started the first ride-hailing app of Nepal. It was called Tootle. And this conversation with him was really enlightening because he said that it's all a dopamine game. So you want to take in the people, the workers, and it's the new workers who are excited about it. And they will work their guts out, and they will work for 12 hours or 14 hours, and they will travel anywhere. They are so intent on making the money, and they are seeing this as this brand new opportunity that they are really excited. But as you get older in the system, you somehow lose that motivation because it's a taxing job, or the novelty wears off. And therefore, they are less inclined to even, travel longer distances, and they complain more, and often they drop out of the system. So they want to concentrate on the newer people so that they are more motivated and give them more opportunity to earn. This is what he told me. And he had run a ride-hailing app, and he built it, and he knew it inside out. So I thought it was pretty enlightening, that whatever insight he gave me.
I mean, that's really valuable insight because it's coming from the person who is designing these apps. And I reckon while reading it that while you were able to talk to many workers who had lots of concerns, complaints about the opaqueness of the algorithm that kind of ruled their lives, and the fact that when they had problems, like even HR was not available. It is just a bot you can talk to. No reasons are given for your ID being blocked and things like that. Were you able to talk to people on the other side, in Swiggy, in Zomato, in Uber, in these big boys who might have answers to those questions, or were they as opaque to you as to the workers?
So I did consciously, put out the voices of the workers, the customers, the small sellers, more than the people who built the tech platforms. I did that deliberately because you hear them all the time in media, in interviews, and all kinds of places. They have a platform to give their point of view. But these voiceless people, you never hear them. And that's what I consciously wanted to bring out. Also, the few people I did speak to, I got very templated answers about how Uber works or whatever. However, there were a few conversations I had where people spoke to me off the record. There was this guy who had worked in food delivery, and he had worked in quick commerce, and he had moved out of the industry. So he was willing to chat over coffee in Hyderabad one day. And he told me that somebody's got to pay. Something's got to give, because the algorithm is such that it is trying to match the best worker with the customer, and it has so much data and the way it works, etc. He's saying that somebody is the worker. So he said that every few weeks, managers study the data, they tweak the algorithm, and they introduce a new rule. So rules are always designed to enhance the customer experience, because the customer, as I have said in the book, is the god, is the most privileged part of this entire ecosystem, privileged entity. So sometimes the new rules impact the payment structures of the delivery fleet, and then they get angry and they go on strike, etc. The changes are not intended to lower their earnings, but the company cannot bear losses and the customer is priority. So somebody's got to pay, and that somebody ends up being the worker. That's what he said, which was really insightful.
And I mean, when you talk about the food industry, one of the things which was really eye-opening for me reading your book was to just understand the breakup. Because sometimes I go to a restaurant and I say, oh my God, the price on my Swiggy menu is so much higher than what I'm seeing at the restaurant. I should really stop ordering from Swiggy or Zomato or whatever food delivery app. And you have these figures here which says an aggregator typically charges 25 to 30% to the restaurant partner for delivery. Then the restaurant has to give a 15 to 20% discount to be present in the customer's consideration set. So when I open my app, they should pop up. In addition, they spend another 10% for discovery as advertising on the platform. So restaurants are now spending 45 to 55% more on online delivery. Are more and more restaurants finding that this is really worth it for them, especially if you're a small restaurant, or would you be better off being discovered around the neighborhood and servicing your neighborhood than to increase your catchment area so much, but you're paying through the nose for it?
So I spoke to this person who was the ex-president of the National Restaurant Association, Riaz Amlani. He's been quoted in the book. And he said that small restaurants are, bled dry by their appearance on food delivery platforms. And there's a long conversation with a restaurateur in Hyderabad who explains how it is for her. And for sure, it has not been easy for them. And that mythical extension of the catchment area has in fact been mythical, because by the time the customer has found them through the app and has ordered them, it doesn't really happen, because unless you've paid a lot of money, you're not even there in the consideration set of the customer. So if you are a restaurant in Andheri and everyone around Andheri knows you, they are the people who know you and they are going to order because they have eaten from you before. But somebody in Breach Candy is not going to say, hey, there's this lovely restaurant in Andheri, let me order from them. Also because the food by the time it reaches there will be unpalatable. So it is eventually just that catchment area which really serves the particular restaurant, as it was before in the days when the Chotu used to take the packet and go to the nearby building and drop the food. So it's virtually that. But as that NRAI, National Restaurant Association of India president told me, it's a severe feeling of FOMO among the restaurants. And they feel if I'm not there on the app, I possibly don't exist, because, customers will think, he's not even there on Swiggy, Zomato. So, is he doing badly, or is he even worth considering? There are just a few people who have sort of had the courage to break away from that. There's this restaurant in Goa, for example, I'm saying. And that restaurant, of course, it's a high-end restaurant. But he said that what I offer to my customers in my restaurant is very special. There's live music and the way the food is served and the flavors and the temperature is very different. I'm offering an entire experience. If I put that in a plastic dabba and it goes to his table and he's going to eat it, I don't know in what condition he eats it, and then he gives me a bad review and then he just says anything about it, it doesn't make sense to me. I would rather concentrate on the people who are there with me in that restaurant. So therefore, he said only like 5-10% of my entire earnings comes from food delivery platforms. So the few of them have sort of broken the mold, but most of them just feel that they have to be there and they're paying through their nose to be listed on the platform.
And one way people try to beat the system, and I'm sure people listening to this have experiences, because we all have, is when you get into one of your Uber or whatever ride-hailing apps and the driver says, how much are they showing you as the fare? Okay, let's go offline. You just pay me that amount, which means he's basically cutting out Uber as the middleman in this journey. You paid as a customer, I'm paying the same, but he gets all the money. Uber, obviously, all these apps which are monitoring it know that this is happening because the person has already accepted this ride and come to me. So don't they penalize? I mean, these apps sound so controlling and vindictive. Don't they penalize these drivers? I mean, how does this happen, still keep happening so frequently?
They do. And it happens, it's pretty obvious because sometimes, a guy has come to your doorstep and then he says, Madam, offline chalenge kya? And, he wants to cut a deal with you. But obviously, Uber knows that this customer request came through their platform and the guy has reached there and suddenly he's cancelling it. So obviously they know, and they are the kings of data and, analytics. So of course they know. So apparently it still keeps happening because there is really deep resentment about the commission charged. It has grown from 20 to 25 to even 30% now. And therefore, drivers want to, this is their counter rebellion kind of thing. They want to make a point and strike these deals with people. And it especially happens when people are going to the airport, because then it's not profitable for the driver after commissions and all are accounted for. And from what I hear from drivers is that this happens like 3 times, then their ID gets blocked or they're given a warning. And, it also explains the emergence of models like Nammayatri. And, Nammayatri is there in Bangalore. It's a sort of ride-hailing app with no commissions, with no middlemen. It's just the drivers have formed a cooperative. And that's also now there in the north, in Delhi, in Hyderabad.
In Calcutta, there's Yatri Sathi, which is the same concept.
Yes, the same thing.
But that begs the question, given that these apps, which are essentially providing the same service, but cutting out the middleman, so why haven't all drivers flocked to Namayatri and Yatri Sathi and basically killed Uber? Because if they all went there, everyone would just use those apps.
Yeah, I thought about this myself. I think a lot of it is first mover advantage. So even people like us, for example, like even, someone like me, I know a Namayatri exists. And it's not the first thing that comes to my mind when I want to book a cab. So I think there's low awareness of it, and all the other names that we are familiar with have a huge first mover advantage in the domains that they operate in. And similarly, ONDC, which the government has done to sort of level the playing field for small retailers and stuff. So that also hasn't, it's taken off, but it's not on top of the mind of the consumer. And unless that happens, they can't be a viable alternative to the apps that already exist.
So the government has taken certain steps. What do you think is the role of the government in this? Because I'm sure like the whole point of the gig economy was that, you are the boss, you just work when you want, you work with the company, but you're not really an employee of the company. So government doesn't have to get involved in this. But do you think the government actually does have a role here?
Okay, so the governments across countries have been caught napping because tech has sort of moved by leaps and bounds, and by the time they've figured out what's happening, things have changed. Entire business models have been formed, and they are functioning. And definitely now it does look like the government has some sort of role to play in ring fencing certain things, like, for example, the wages of the worker. Should there be a minimum wage for the worker, or should everything be variable and left to how much business he gets? Or secondly, how many hours should the guy work to get a certain amount of money? Should he be working for 14 hours or 16 hours? Shouldn't there be a cap for like this many hours he works and he does get a minimum wage and the rest of it can be variable? These are things that the government can do. Similarly, welfare measures like what if he loses his life while working, which happens very often in accidents when people are speeding and stuff. Can the government make it easier for the family to get insurance? And there are other things that the tech platform and the government can do, for example, like creating employment for women. And like we discussed earlier, a lot of these things are emerging now, and as things that the government should take a call on, should, open its eyes and see that, okay, there are these new business models and this is how they're working. So Rajasthan was the first to pass a legislation for the welfare of gig workers. Karnataka has done so, and Telangana is, I think, soon going to do one.
Has the Rajasthan legislation actually made a quantifiable difference on the ground?
Unfortunately, I have to say no, because when I started researching for this book in 2023, Jaipur was one of the first places I went to, because in July that legislation had been passed, and there was much celebration amongst gig worker unions and stuff. Aruna Roy, the Magsaysay Award winner, was involved in drafting it, and all that had happened, and there was a lot of excitement. But 2 years down the line, I'm seeing that people are saying the same things and the same complaints, and all these points that I told you I'm hearing in all seminars and conferences and articles on the paper. But the fact that they are repeated shows that it's not really been done. And in between, the government of India is also making an attempt and trying to give IDs to, there's something called the Shram portal, where every worker has an ID and he puts his ID there, and then he will get welfare or according to how many hours he's worked and where he's worked, etc. But as far as I know, and from what I have spoken to certain workers and union leaders and all, things have not changed on the ground as yet. Though one can be hopeful that there is interest definitely and there is focus on it, and which is why Karnataka, Telangana have also got into the game and passed a draft legislation.
Can things change, Vandana, when essentially, as you said, in these things, the customer is the king? And the gig worker is basically squished between the app and the customer. They're the ones who always bear the brunt to make my experience as a customer more pleasurable. And customers are greedy, and we get used to convenience terribly. So we can sit here and you and I can talk about, oh my God, how terrible these conditions are. But when push comes to shove, we will opt for that convenience. And you had a couple of very revealing statistics in the book, where one of the things you say, like, as sort of temperature, because of climate change, as temperatures increase, over 40 degrees, people are going around in the middle of the afternoon. Maybe government could mandate that between 12 and 4, people don't do non-essential deliveries. Sounds great. But that's exactly the time when I don't want to go out of the house. So I want someone else to do it for me. And I will reach for it. Or the fact that we talk about like, oh, Blinkit, this 10-minute, 8-minute delivery, just ridiculous. But you found that, I think there was some survey that showed more people in India choose that than people in China when they're given the option, do you want it in 8 minutes? So we want it.
No, absolutely. And like I said, we are used to it, and therefore we want it now more than, we didn't even know. These are things we didn't even know we needed. It just appeared like magic during the pandemic, and now we can't live without. Blinkit comes to my own house so often. And despite everything that I'm seeing, but so middle class India is definitely not going to go back to when, they were actually walking down to the Kirana store for everything. So, which is why I think that the government's intervention is needed more than ever, because this is not going to slow down. It's only going to increase the presence of technology in daily life, and e-commerce is only going to boom. But somewhere somebody needs to look at the negative externalities that it engenders and, see how we can sort of ring fence the smaller players over here. And by smaller players, I'm not just talking about small restaurants, but also small retailers on big e-commerce platforms like Amazon and Flipkart, etc. Because like the restaurant, they are also working under an oppressive system which they barely comprehend. So, for example, a small seller of, masalas, he wants to be on Amazon, because if he's not, there's FOMO again, that maybe there is this huge invisible market who I am missing out on if I'm not. But actually, in order to be visible as a masala seller, he has to do a ton of things, and he has to pay for advertisement, and he has to follow certain rules which Amazon lays down, many of which are quite oppressive and many of which are incomprehensible to a small player. But he has to do that.
And he has to compete with Amazon's own masalas that it's selling, that it will always prioritize. As a customer, I'll see the Amazon products before I see that guy's product.
Yes. And in fact, as soon as one small player's product starts doing well, mysteriously there is a Amazon product which has the, it seems the same, or it has the same composition, or if it's a dress, then it has the same cut or whatever. So a lot of the small players are mystified at how this is happening, and could I be so relevant that somebody like Amazon is even copying me? And, where am I fitting into these pages and pages of masala sellers, buried somewhere deep down? Which customer is going to look at them, and how is their catchment going to improve? And for that, how much of inventory do they have to keep? They have to be on the listed among all their products. There is a danger of being delisted. There's a danger of new penalties being levied on you. If you see the Amazon Seller Central, there's one such thing, and it's there across countries. It is a cesspool of complaints and angst and frustration. There isn't one positive experience. People in the UK, in US, they are constantly, and they're bewildered, they don't know what's happening, they're constantly complaining. So everything isn't what we think is on the surface. It's not this wonderful large collection of retailers whom the customer can choose from. No, there's a lot of stuff happening in the background which the small seller is dealing with, and that's the part I think that where the government can intervene and lay down some protection.
In closing, I want to step back a little bit and ask, we've talked about a lot of the issues that happen behind the scenes unknown to us. But, we just see the shiny, happy interface on our phones and we're like, oh, should we get this biryani or that, whatever. But as you talk to all these people on all sides of the debate, people who've gained from it, people who've lost from it, people who are frustrated by it but still can't quit it, what do you think this whole economy, this dependence on OTP, this OTP economy in a way, is doing to our sense of self and our sense of what it means to be a worker now? Because we are, as I read it, I realized that more and more all of us are becoming used to a world where we will do transactions without ever needing to really talk to anybody. I mean, at the most, we'll say thank you to the guy who comes and delivers it. 2 years ago, when my mother was calling on the phone for the sabzi to be also delivered at home, she was actually having a conversation with the person. The person who would come, she knew the person's name, she would have a conversation. I'm not trying to be sort of a romantic Luddite, but is there a certain price we are paying as a society for this level of convenience, which has also atomized us so considerably that we are used to and even want transactions to happen without having to deal with any person on the other end?
So there are a couple of things I want to say. The world of work has changed, beyond recognition, and it's going to happen even more. So for the longest time, since the Industrial Revolution, there was a physical space where people went to, right? There was a factory and people lined up, they worked there and they met each other. There was a certain camaraderie, and work is not just work, right? There's emotional bonds. It's a place where there's an exchange of energy every day, right? That whole system has completely vanished. So here are these atomized individuals going in their two-wheelers who are told that you go to this customer now, you don't know who that is, you go to the next one after that, you go to C, A, B, C, and they don't know who those customers are. They're just dropping some packets and leaving. There's no physical space where they meet up peers. There's no exchange of, experience. They don't say, okay, this happened, that, because the clock is always ticking. You have to run. There's that. So the spatial sense of a workplace has completely gone. And so has a temporal sense, because what is the idea of time in gig work? You can log in anytime, you can log off anytime. You have to run quickly from place to place. So the temporal aspect is also completely distorted from what it used to be. So that idea of work has completely changed with technology. And this is not just for the delivery worker, it is also for the online worker. The sense of isolation that is brought about in work life is considerable, and it has really changed how we think of work and office. And as that space is shrinking more and more, this is only going to change. Everything is online. You work from home, you work online, you never need to come to office. So all of that, that's one aspect of it. Then as customers, there is definitely a sense of increasing isolation that we are going to face as we cut out, these hubs of community interaction like the corner store. So what is the corner store? It's not just about selling, right? It's also a place where you go, you meet your neighbor, you know what's happening around. That person died, this person is getting married. Some kind of conversation happens, which is a social lubricant in communities. And on one hand, we are saying that people are getting depressed, people are lonely. In some countries, there's a minister for loneliness. All that is happening. And research has shown that casual conversations, casual interactions in the community with neighbors, with friends, is really an antidote to depression, because it's a sort of a social capital that you build up. And you don't get that. You're cutting that off completely when you're at home and everything is coming to your doorstep. You meet no one. You don't even meet that guy who's delivering the stuff. In the example that you gave, where your mother was calling for vegetables, it'll be the same guy who's coming every day. So she will know him personally. There is something happening there, right? But that is completely cut off. So isolation, loneliness, and therefore inputs to depression and other conditions are a reality, and I can see them increase unless we can, think of some counter solution to this.
Well, you've given us much to mull over, even as we reach for our phones to order the next thing, because that is an addiction too. I have friends who've actually had to uninstall these apps from their phone because they kept reaching for every time they had nothing to do, they would reach for a phone.
Yeah, I'm as much a user, so I'm as much caught in this entire, whirlpool as anyone else.
But thank you so much for joining us and talking about this gig economy, Vandana Vasudevan.
Thank you so much, Sandip. It was a pleasure having this conversation.
Vandana Vasudevan is a writer, columnist, and development sector professional consulting for various national and international organizations. Besides OTP Please, online buyers, sellers, and gig workers in South Asia, she's also the author of Urban Villager, Life in an Indian Satellite Town, and Tough Customer. Find us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at Express Podcasts. This show was produced by Shashank Bhargava and edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. Thanks for listening. This is Sandip Roy on Express Audio.